This is the TJ Hoisington Podcast. Unleash your greatness within.
All right. Have a seat. Have a seat. Thank you very much. Thank you. Woo! Good evening. It's very exciting to be with you tonight. I'm going to ask you a few questions on the outset of what I share with you tonight. Let me ask you a couple questions. How many of you, by a show of hands, can play the piano? Okay, a few of you. How many of you, by a show of hands, can run a marathon? Very good. A few of you. How many of you here today can speak 3 or more languages? Oh, we have someone up here that can speak 8. All right. Anyone speak Chinese? Ni hao ma? Ni hao? I do speak a little Chinese. Notice a little pattern here, my friends. I didn't ask if you could do it right now. I asked if you can. A little shift in your thinking, my friends. In the English language, the ugliest 4-letter word is the word can't. Eliminate it from your vocabulary. I remember I was in 8th grade. I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to play football. I wanted to wrestle. And I wanted to pole vault. In 8th grade, where I lived in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the 8th graders didn't have a sporting program, so we had to go to the high school if we wanted to play sports. So it was us younger kids were up with the high schoolers. It was track season. I wanted to pole vault. I went with a couple of my friends that wanted to pole vault too, from the 8th grade, from the middle school. And I remember those first few days of trying to learn how to pole vault. You run with that big pole. And then what do? In the beginning, you're not trying to bend it. You're just trying to get over 5 feet or 6 feet. And I remember this was a light bulb moment for me as an 8th grader. I remember I kept knocking the horizontal bar over. My buddies that were also in the 8th grade were able to get over 6 feet, but not TJ. And I remember getting so frustrated. I kept knocking it down. I probably tried it again and again and again, 8 times. Still could not get over that 6 feet. I was frustrated. It just so happened at the high school, there was a state champion pole vaulter. His name was Stan. Stan was cool. He always seemed respectful. He was good looking. Not that I knew that, but I did notice that all the cheerleaders were always hanging around Stan. But the coolest thing was he was always respectful to us 8th graders. So as I was trying 8 times, 9 times, 10 times, knocking it down, I got frustrated. And I threw my pole down, and I said under my breath, I can't do it. I didn't think much about it. I'm just an 8th grader. And then all of a sudden, guess what happened? Stan walked over to me quietly. He said, TJ, come here.
You already know. My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com.
And he looked me square in the eye, and he said to me, can't, never could do it. And I remember going home that night thinking, I will never say can't again in the context of one's potential. Because each one of us can do more than we are representing in our life today. That's what I've studied for 22 years, and that's what I've been teaching on and writing books about for the last 15 years. How does an ordinary person do extraordinary things? What's the difference, is my question, between a high achiever and a lower achiever? And that's what I've spent my life studying. I want to share some of those thoughts with you today. What are some specific laws that will make the difference in your business and in your personal lives? Does that sound good to you? Yes. Some actual laws, like the law of gravity. Whether you believe in it or not, you jump off the building, you're going to fall. What I mean by law is that it works. It's consistent. If you apply it consistently, it will work for you consistently. And that's what I want to share with you today. Because see, if I were to go into an elementary school today, and I were to go into let's say I go into a class with 30 first graders, and I walk in and I say, okay, all you little kids, how many of you, by a show of hands, how many of you 30 little first graders can run an ultra marathon? How many hands do you think would go up? 60. I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. But what happens when you get to the 4th grade? You think it's a trick question, right? I'm not going to say anything. I don't know if it's a trick. And from 1st grade to 4th grade, we slowly get conditioned to believe, well, maybe it's not possible for me. And we set goals, and throughout our lives, we talk ourselves out of goals. How many of you ever done that before? You went to an event like this, you got excited, and then about a week later, you started to find the evidence in your world to say, it's maybe not for me. It's not possible for me. I am Mr. Possibility. I believe in possibilities. I believe in going from nothing and trying to achieve something great, because that's a little part of my story. But let's just look at some ordinary people that have done some extraordinary things. Would you like to see a few examples? How about this gentleman? His name is Cliff Young. And Cliff Young, in Australia, they do a run where it's an ultra marathon. It takes a week to run. Professional athletes do it from all over the world. They fly in, they run from Melbourne to Sydney. It's 586 miles. In 1980, Cliff Young decided that he wanted to run this marathon he had never ran before in his life. But his friends encouraged him to do it. They noticed that he worked on a farm and he worked in duck boots. And they noticed he didn't have to plow or anything. So all the work he did on his feet. So his buddy says, you ought to try out for that run. And he decided to do it. He must have mulled over it for a few days, few weeks, and thought, I'm going to try out. So he did. He conditioned himself a little bit, got ready for it, and then he was going to go up against the 25 and 35-year-old athletes, professional athletes that came in from all over the world. The day began. The gun went off, and he started to run. Now see, sometimes there's a beautiful thing that happens when you're ignorant. And Cliff Young didn't know what the correct rules were for long-distance running. See, because all the professional athletes at the time would run 18 hours a day, and then they would take they would rest for 6 hours, get back up in the morning, and continue their run. Cliff Young didn't know you were supposed to stop for 6 hours. He just kept running. When he got tired, like everyone else, he would pull off to the side of the road. He would rest for maybe 20 minutes. He would get a little bit of a cat nap. What would he do next? He would eat a little bit of nuts and drink a little bit of water, and he'd get back up and keep running through the night and so forth. Well, you know what? Cliff Young in 1980 broke the all-time record. In fact, he didn't just break it by a few minutes, not even by a couple hours. He broke the all-time record in the face of 25-year-olds that were in peak conditioning and 35-year-olds that were professional athletes. He beat the all-time record by 24 hours. And today, do you know what they call it? The Cliff Young Shuffle. He changed the professional mindset where you just run with this little shuffle. Whereas back then, all the runners would run with these long strides and they would need that 6 hours to recuperate. Cliff Young changed that, and he did it 2 years again after that in a row, 3 times in a row. The question is it possible? I say yes. How about this next gentleman? He was 14 years old when he got a creative idea that John Goddard woke up one day and he wrote down 127 goals that he would like to accomplish in his lifetime. Here's a few examples of some of those goals. He wanted to scuba dive, but he also wanted to dive 50 feet down, hold his breath for 2.5 minutes underwater. How many of you would do that? Not really, right? He wanted to fly an F-16. He was able to do that. He wanted to play Clair de Lune on the piano. He was able to do that in his lifetime. He wanted to climb many of the top peaks and mountains around the world. He was able to do that. I was able to meet him in his 80s. I was able to meet him. And I asked John Goddard, how were you able to do all these goals throughout your life, 127 of them? And by the way, it was Life magazine back in 1950 or 1960 that first came across him in a magazine. They had written up about this 14-year-old boy that had written down 127 different goals, and he spent most of his life trying to accomplish them. And he did. He spent most of his life trying to do it. You know what he told me when I met with him privately one time? He says, when you take the impossible and you calculate it, all the possibilities unfold before you. Think about that. When you take the impossible and you begin to calculate it, you start to look for evidence of why it is possible, you'll start finding the resources and opportunities that will make it possible. Believe. How about this gentleman, Michael Downing? Michael Downing was about 100 years ago, 14 years old, when he was on the back of a wagon. He was going through a heavy snowstorm. Before his parents realized that he was missing and had fallen off the back of the wagon, he had been severely frostbitten. In fact, they had to amputate his right leg, his left leg, his right arm, and his left hand. Tough thing for anybody to go through, would you not agree? You bet. He healed a little bit from that, and when he was able to, he went to the county commissioner and says, if you will help me get my education, I promise you, one day I will pay you back in full. Well, guess what? Later in life, he was able to pay the county back in full. But what's most important and what's cool about this story is during World War II, he was asked to go speak and to motivate and sort of inspire a group of wounded soldiers that were in a makeshift hospital that was made out of a hotel, 300 or 400 wounded soldiers who were depressed and down and frustrated with life. He flew over there and he spoke to them. He says, you can still dream big dreams no matter what's happened to you. You could still dream big dreams. Well, guess what happened? Everyone started to boo him. The booing, as the report says, got so loud that he thought, I've got to quiet down this audience. So guess what he did? He sat down. He took off his right leg. The booing stopped, but the resentment didn't. So he continued. He took off his left leg. He continued. Took off his right arm. And then he flipped off his left hand. And he sat there, a stump of a body, telling these young men and these young women that their future was still bright, that possibilities were still out there for them, if they will have the right attitude, if you will. You see, the beautiful thing about Michael Downing is he went on to be married and had 5 beautiful children. Michael Downing was awarded the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Man of the Year Award, and he was also became the president of one of Minnesota's most successful banks in history. To me, that's a beautiful story of possibility. No matter your background, your past does not have to equal your future. I've studied this and seen this happen over and over and over. Age is not a prerequisite for success either. Some of the youngest people I know, attitudinal-wise, are the oldest people I know. And some of the older people I know are younger people. They have energy. They're excited about life. What about you? Are you the type of person that walks into a room and brightens the room? Or are you the type of person that kind of walks around with a straight face and just kind of, just walking around? Hey there. What'd you think? I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. It's my pleasure to share these insights and distinctions that will lead to more happiness, fulfillment, and achievement in life. So, hey, if you like the message, if you like the podcast episode, hey, do me a favor. Would you give me a thumbs up? Would you give me a star rating? I'd really appreciate it. Better yet, if you wouldn't mind writing a little review wherever you're listening to this from, that would be really great. I'd appreciate it. All right, now go out there and unleash your greatness within.
GreatnessWithin.com.